My name is Maddie, 33 years old, and the founder of Chicago's most ruthless financial forensic firm. I make corporate nightmares disappear for billionaires. But my own personal nightmare walked right through my boardroom doors on a Tuesday morning. My mother, who threw me out into the snow 15 years ago, demanded $120,000 for the siblings she replaced me with. When I refused, she threatened to completely destroy my corporate empire with a vicious lie. I simply smiled, pressed a button on my desk, and silently prepared to bankrupt her entire fake life instead. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own life. 40 floors above downtown Chicago, the heavy, soundproof glass doors of my firm were not designed to be breached by sheer suburban entitlement. Brenda had always possessed a unique talent for bulldozing boundaries. I was in the middle of dissecting a massive, fraudulent offshore ledger for a major banking client. The stakes in that room were astronomically high. The men sitting around my table were executives who valued discretion and absolute control. Suddenly, the solid mahogany doors violently swung open, shattering the quiet focus of the room. My head security guard, Davis, was physically struggling to restrain a frantic, well-dressed woman who was pushing her way inside. It was Brenda, my mother. Right behind her, looking utterly unapologetic and reeking of cheap cologne disguised as luxury, was my stepfather, Gregory. I had not laid eyes on either of them in 15 long years. I had not seen them since the exact night they decided my existence was disposable. I did not gasp in shock. I did not cry or show a single ounce of vulnerability. I simply closed my laptop with a sharp echoing snap that instantly silenced the entire boardroom. "Davis, it is fine," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial calm that made the executives at the table freeze. "Let them go, but stay right by the door." My clients stared in stunned disbelief as Brenda marched directly to the head of the long conference table. She did not look at my clients. She did not look around at the sleek corporate empire I had built from absolutely nothing. She reached into her counterfeit designer handbag and slammed a crumpled university invoice and a wedding venue contract directly onto my highly confidential forensic reports. "Tyler needs $70,000 to secure his fall enrollment at New York University, and Brittany's wedding venue requires a $50,000 deposit by this Friday," Brenda announced. Her voice was pitched at that specific, commanding frequency she regularly used to terrorize retail workers. "I know you just closed a massive merger deal last month. I read all about it in the business journal. Write the check, Maddie." The sheer audacity of her demand hung heavily in the air-conditioned room. My clients shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, unsure if they should leave or call for backup. I simply raised a single hand, signaling them to remain exactly where they were. I looked down at the expensive bills, then looked up directly into the eyes of the woman who shared my DNA but possessed absolutely none of my loyalty. "You brought security into my boardroom and interrupted a multi-million-dollar forensic audit to demand $120,000 I asked," leaning back slowly in my chair, "for the 2 children you replaced me with. You are their older sister," Gregory barked. He stepped forward quickly, puffing out his chest as if trying to physically intimidate me right in front of my clients. "You have a moral obligation to this family. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for years. Now that you are sitting up here in this fancy glass tower, it is time you paid your family back." I let out a low, humorless laugh that immediately made Gregory flinch. A roof over my head. I stood up, slowly planting my palms flat on the cold glass table and leaning forward. I did not raise my voice. I let the absolute zero temperature of my tone do all the cutting. "Let me refresh your selective memory, Gregory. 15 years ago, on Christmas Eve, I was 18 years old. You and Brenda packed all of my clothes into 3 black trash bags and threw them out onto the snow-covered driveway. Do you remember why, because Tyler, who was only 4 years old at the time, desperately needed a dedicated room for his Legos? And Brittany apparently needed a walk-in closet? I watched the color drain slightly from his face, but I did not stop. You stood on that porch and told me I was a financial burden. You told me I was nothing but an ugly, useless drain on your precious resources. You abandoned me in the freezing cold to freeze or starve. And now you have the nerve to march in here and demand I fund their luxury lives. Brenda loudly rolled her eyes, an exaggerated motion of profound dismissal that I remembered all too well from my childhood. Oh, stop playing the victim, Maddie. We did you a huge favor. We pushed you out of the nest so you could learn true independence. If we had not been incredibly tough on you, you would not be sitting in this CEO chair today making millions. You owe us for building your resilience. Now stop being selfish and sign the check. Family helps family. I am not your family, I stated with absolute finality. And I am definitely not your personal ATM. Davis, escort them out immediately. If they resist even slightly, call the police and have them removed in handcuffs. Brenda's smug expression instantly dissolved into a mask of pure vindictive malice. She reached back into her bag and pulled out a stapled stack of papers, slamming them down exactly where the invoices had been. I thought you might be difficult today, so I prepared this in advance. It is a fully drafted article I have ready to submit to the Chicago Tribune right now. I glanced down at the top page. The bold headline screamed across the paper, Chicago corrupt CEO, how she stole her dying grandmother's trust fund to build her empire. If you do not wire the money by Friday, Brenda hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the bitter coffee on her breath. Her eyes were wide and manic. I will hit send. I will tell the entire world that you stole my mother's money. What do you think your billionaire clients will do when they read that their trusted forensic auditor is a common thief? I will completely ruin your reputation, Maddie. $120,000 is a very cheap price to save your entire company. The lie was as predictable as it was pathetic. The actual truth was that my grandmother had secretly left her modest life savings exclusively to me in a protected trust because she knew Brenda would quickly squander every penny. Brenda had spent the last decade aggressively convincing her suburban social circle that I was a thief simply to cover up the embarrassing fact that she had been completely cut out of the will. Are you genuinely trying to blackmail me right now, Brenda? I asked, picking up the drafted article between two fingers. I am securing my children's future, she replied, haughtily adjusting her coat. You have exactly 48 hours to make the transfer. I tore the paper neatly in half, then in quarters, and dropped the shredded pieces directly onto the floor at her feet. You have exactly 10 seconds to exit my building before I have you arrested for extortion, I said, hitting a red button on my desk console. Security, we need police dispatch to floor 40 immediately. Gregory panicked. He grabbed Brenda's arm and began dragging her forcefully toward the exit. Friday, Maddie! She shrieked loudly as Davis shoved them both out into the hallway. The heavy, soundproof doors clicked shut, restoring the quiet. I turned back to my stunned clients. My apologies, gentlemen. Let us return to the offshore ledger. The garbage has been taken out. But as I looked at the numbers on my screen, my mind was already calculating a completely different kind of warfare. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of destruction. They had absolutely no idea they just challenged a forensic auditor to a fight. I did not wait for the 48 hours to expire. As a crisis management expert, my first rule is absolute. You never let a threat mature. You neutralize it at the root. I spent the remainder of Tuesday evening locking down every personal and professional vulnerability. I alerted my legal team to the extortion attempt and tightened our server firewalls. Brenda was an impulsive, spiteful woman. She would not wait until Friday. She needed immediate gratification and total control. I knew she would strike as soon as she realized I was not going to wire the funds to her account. Wednesday morning arrived with a digital vengeance. Less than 24 hours after her dramatic boardroom invasion, my firm's secure servers detected a massive anomaly. My phone rang at exactly 7 in the morning. It was my chief operations officer informing me that 3 of our highest-paying corporate clients had just forwarded anonymous emails they received overnight. The emails were sent from a heavily encrypted account and contained heavily doctored financial spreadsheets. These fabricated documents were meticulously designed to falsely imply that my firm was actively laundering money for offshore shell companies. The spreadsheets were amateurish upon close inspection, using outdated accounting formulas and mismatched formatting. But to a panicked client, they looked like a smoking gun. Brenda had targeted clients she likely found by stalking my company website. It was a crude, desperate smear campaign, clearly meant to trigger an immediate panic and force my hand. Brenda was trying to destroy my livelihood to compel my compliance. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury I cannot afford in my line of work. I immediately brought in my lead cybersecurity specialist, a brilliant analyst who routinely unraveled dark web financial crimes. We shut down our primary incoming servers to contain any potential malware and began isolating the origin of the attack. Within 2 hours, my team ripped right past the cheap commercial virtual private network the sender had used to hide their tracks. We traced the digital footprint, pulling the exact Internet Protocol address and the physical location of the router that launched the defamatory emails. The result made me pause and stare at the glowing monitors in absolute disgust. The Internet Protocol address did not trace back to Brenda and Gregory's heavily mortgaged suburban home. It traced directly to a highly secure commercial network. The address belonged to a high-end architectural design firm located in the upscale South Loop district of Chicago. I ran a quick background check on the business registration. The firm was owned and operated by a man named Malik. Malik was a 26-year-old African-American architect. He was brilliant, highly respected in the city's urban development circles, and, most importantly, he was Brittany's fiancé. He was my younger sister's future husband. The wedding venue deposit Brenda had demanded was for his wedding. I immediately saw the twisted narrative Brenda was trying to spin. She was using Malik's office network to launch a corporate cyber attack. She was intentionally keeping her own hands clean while actively weaponizing her future son-in-law's infrastructure against me. If my cybersecurity team retaliated, or if I filed a police report, the federal investigation would fall squarely on Malik. She was setting him up to take the fall for a federal crime just to squeeze money out of me. It was a calculated, sociopathic maneuver that showed exactly how little she cared about anyone but herself. She was willing to risk the freedom and career of an innocent man just to get a wedding deposit and tuition money. I did not call ahead. I printed the thick stack of Internet Protocol trace reports, grabbed my tailored wool coat, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I maneuvered my car through the dense Chicago morning traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Malik had built an impressive business, and Brenda was treating his livelihood like a disposable tool in her blackmail scheme. I drove directly to the South Loop, my mind perfectly sharp and focused on the incoming confrontation. Malik's firm was situated in a beautifully restored industrial loft with exposed brick walls and massive glass windows. It screamed success and stability, representing everything Brenda desperately craved by association. I pushed through the heavy glass front doors and walked straight past his reception area. The front desk assistant called out to me, asking if I had a scheduled appointment, but I ignored her entirely. I marched down the polished concrete hallway with purposeful strides until I reached the main drafting office. The solid oak door was ajar. I pushed it open with enough force to make it hit the adjacent wall with a loud thud. Malik was standing over a large blueprint spread across a massive wooden table, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up, startled by the sudden intrusion. His dark eyes narrowed in immediate recognition. He had undoubtedly seen my face in whatever few family photos Brenda had not destroyed or hidden over the years. Matty Malik said, his voice instantly dropping to a hostile, defensive register. He stood up straight and crossed his arms firmly over his chest, his posture rigid. You have a lot of nerve showing up here. I know exactly who you are, and I want you out of my office right now. We need to talk about the cyber attack you launched against my firm this morning, I said, walking right up to his drafting table. I took the thick folder of Internet Protocol traces and dropped it directly onto his immaculate blueprints with a loud, resounding slap. Because right now, I am deciding whether to involve federal investigators and have you arrested for corporate sabotage. Malik did not flinch. Instead, his expression twisted with intense, righteous anger. He scoffed, stepping closer to me, as if my physical presence was an offense to him. You are threatening me, you. He shook his head in absolute disbelief. Brittany cried herself to sleep last night because of you. She told me everything. She told me how you drained your grandmother's trust fund, the money that was supposed to be for the whole family, and left her parents struggling to pay their bills because of your selfish greed. Brenda and Gregory are taking out predatory payday loans just to survive and pay for our wedding. You stole from them. You abandoned them. And now you want to ruin my business too? You are a cold-blooded sociopath, Maddie. I stared at him, letting his accusations hang in the air between us. The sheer volume of lies Brenda had spoon-fed this intelligent, successful young man was staggering. They had painted me as the ultimate villain of the family narrative, and he had bought it, completely, hook, line, and sinker. But as a forensic auditor, I deal strictly in facts, numbers, and verifiable evidence. I do not deal in emotional manipulation or suburban sob stories. Malik? I said quietly, keeping my posture entirely relaxed and professional. I want you to look at page 4 of that folder I left on your blueprints. He glared at me, refusing to touch the paper, as if it were contaminated. I am not looking at your fake documents. Get out of my office before I call security. Look at the document, I commanded, my voice slicing through the air with absolute authority. It is a certified, notarized copy of my grandmother's will, alongside the original bank transfer statements. My grandmother left her money exclusively to me because Brenda had already stolen $40,000 from her retirement account to fund Gregory's failed businesses years ago. The money was never meant for the family. It was meant to protect me from them. Malik hesitated for a fraction of a second, then slowly picked up the file with 2 fingers. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, the official bank seals, and the undeniable proof of Brenda's historical theft. I watched the absolute certainty in his posture begin to fracture, replaced by a flicker of genuine doubt. Now I continued pressing my advantage while he was off balance. Look at page 7. That is the Internet Protocol trace of the defamatory emails sent to my clients this morning. Emails that constitute federal wire fraud and corporate sabotage. They were sent from a computer on this specific network logged in under your administrative credentials, exactly at 8:15 a.m. Malik's head snapped up, his face turning entirely pale. That is impossible. I was at a construction site in the West Loop from 7 until 10 this morning. I was not even in this building. I know, I replied smoothly, but someone else was. Who has access to your office and your computer? Malik's eyes widened as the horrifying realization finally hit him. Brenda, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the office ventilation. She came in early this morning. She said she needed to use my computer to print out some wedding vendor contracts because her printer at home was broken. I gave her my guest password. She didn't just use your computer, Malik, I said, pulling out my iPad and opening a secured portal to my firm's servers. When my team was tracking the Internet Protocol address, we noticed unusual background traffic originating from your personal credentials. With your permission, I want to show you something. Log into your primary banking app right now. Check your credit notifications. Malik pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His hands were trembling slightly. He opened his banking app, staring at the screen in disbelief. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen. He leaned heavily against his wooden drafting table, looking as though he had been physically struck by a truck. What is this?" he choked out. "Read it," I demanded. "There is a $60,000 personal loan," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically across his screen. "Approved yesterday. Dispersed to an external account. I never applied for a loan. I never signed for this." "You didn't," I said, stepping forward, "but Brenda did. She used your social security number, Malik. She stole your identity to secure the funds she couldn't extort from me." The silence in Malik's architectural firm was deafening. The illusion of his perfect future family had just shattered into 60,000 pieces of debt. I watched Malik pacing the floor, his hands gripping his hair, breathing heavily as the reality of the identity theft sank in. He was a smart man, a self-made architect who had built his reputation from the ground up, and in less than 24 hours, Brenda had weaponized his trust to fund her own twisted agenda. "We have to call the police," Malik said, his voice vibrating with fury. "She stole my identity. I am going to have her arrested right now." He reached for his phone. I placed my hand over his. "If you call the police right now, she will play the victim," I warned him, holding his gaze until he stopped moving. "She will cry to Brittany. She will claim it was a misunderstanding, or that she did it to secure the wedding venue out of love. She will completely turn Brittany against you, and you will be the bad guy who sent her mother to jail right before the wedding. Brenda is a master manipulator. You cannot fight her with just a standard police report. You have to destroy her narrative completely." "So what do we do?" Malik demanded, his eyes locking onto mine. He was no longer looking at me as the villainous sister. He was looking at me as his only lifeline. "We dig deeper," I said, pulling out my laptop from my bag and setting it squarely on his drafting table. "Brenda and Gregory demanded $120,000 from me. They stole $60,000 from you. People do not commit federal identity theft just for wedding flowers. That is a highly specific, desperate amount of cash. There is a massive financial fire burning beneath their floorboards, and I am going to find it." I booted up my laptop. Using my firm's forensic software, I bypassed public records and initiated a deep financial audit into Gregory and Brenda's assets. Malik stood right over my shoulder, watching intently as the raw data populated on the screen. What we uncovered within the next 45 minutes was a masterpiece of absolute financial ruin. "Look at this," I pointed to the screen. "Gregory's investment portfolios. He did not just lose money. He decimated everything in highly volatile cryptocurrency trading. He took out multiple leveraged loans against their suburban house just to cover margin calls." I pulled up the county property records. "Their house has 3 separate liens against it," I explained. "They have not paid their mortgage in 8 months. The bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings. They are literally weeks away from being physically evicted by the county sheriff." Malik shook his head in pure disgust. "Brittany told me her parents owned the house outright. They walk around the country club acting like they are local royalty. They judge everyone else for renting or taking out loans." "It gets worse," I murmured, my eyes catching a string of glaring red flags in the federal tax databases. "Much worse. Gregory is under active investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for severe tax evasion. He has been aggressively hiding offshore assets and completely failing to report capital gains for the past 5 years." I ran the final calculation through the forensic database to find the exact penalty he was facing. The number locked onto the screen. The penalty and back taxes he owes to the federal government, I highlighted the bright red number on the screen. Exactly $120,000. If he does not pay it in full by the end of the month, the Internal Revenue Service will seize their remaining frozen assets and officially refer the case for criminal prosecution. The demand for my money had absolutely nothing to do with Tyler's education or Brittany's wedding. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to keep Gregory out of a federal penitentiary. I leaned back in my chair, letting the magnitude of their deception wash over the room. Brenda had played her golden child and her future son-in-law like disposable pawns in a high-stakes game of federal tax evasion. She was willing to ruin Malik's credit, hijack his network for cyber terrorism against my clients, and destroy his future just to bail out her husband. Malik stared at the screen, the anger radiating from him now, completely focused and laser-sharp. "She lied to us about everything," he said quietly. "She smiled in my face at dinner on Sunday, talking about how excited she was to welcome me to the family, knowing she was planning to steal my identity and frame me for corporate sabotage." "That is exactly who she is," I replied, closing the initial tax tab and opening a new search window. "She views people entirely as resources to be extracted. When they run dry, she discards them. I learned that lesson in the snow 15 years ago. You are learning it today." "What is our next move?" Malik asked, his voice hardening into resolve. He was ready to fight back, and he knew I had the arsenal required to win. "First, I need to check one more thing," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "If Brenda is willing to steal your identity and extort me to save Gregory, she would definitely use the closest resources available to her. I need to look at Tyler and Brittany's financial footprints." I initiated a trace on the family's home address. As the data loaded onto the screen, a new, sickening reality began to take shape. The financial ruin extended far beyond Gregory's crypto losses and tax evasion. Brenda had left a trail of destruction that hit much closer to home. I took a breath, preparing to uncover the true depths of my mother's depravity. We were about to find out how she sacrificed her golden children to maintain her wealth. I took a breath, preparing to uncover the true depths of my mother's depravity. We were about to find out how she sacrificed her children to maintain her wealth. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. I bypassed standard consumer bureaus and accessed a secured federal background database that my firm utilized for corporate audits. I needed a picture of the financial identities belonging to the two people Brenda supposedly loved more than anything. I typed in the name of my 19-year-old half-brother, Tyler. The system required a few moments to aggregate data from multiple financial institutions across the country. Malik stood frozen beside my drafting table. The digital progress bar filled slowly across the screen. When the final report loaded, the sheer volume of severe red flags illuminating the dashboard cast a crimson glow over our faces. I stared at the screen, my professional detachment faltering for a fraction of a second. The reality of what I was looking at was staggering. "Oh my God," I whispered, leaning closer to the monitor. "What is it?" Malik asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "What did she do to him?" I clicked on the primary summary tab and maximized the window. "Tyler," I said, pointing a steady finger to the bold text at the top of the boy's credit profile. "Brenda has been actively using Tyler's social security number since he was 14 years old." Malik leaned in, his dark eyes scanning the lines of data. "How is that even possible? He is just a kid. He does not have a real job yet." "It is incredibly easy if you are the parent and have unrestricted access to their legal birth documents," I explained. She started small. A store credit card here, a personal line of credit there. She built a thin file under his stolen identity while he was in high school, but then she escalated rapidly. "Look at the active accounts listed here." I highlighted the specific rows of financial ruin. "There are 6 major credit cards opened in his name. Every single one of them is maxed out and in severe default." I clicked on the transaction histories to reveal the specifics. The data painted a horrifying picture of a woman funding a fake upper-class lifestyle entirely on the back of her own son. The monthly statements were flooded with cash advances of luxury retail purchases and tabs at exclusive steakhouses. The total outstanding debt is exactly $45,000. I stated, feeling pure disgust toward the woman who gave birth to me. But the total debt amount is not even the most destructive part of this nightmare. Look at the top right corner of the dashboard. Look at his credit score. Malik followed my finger to the corner of the screen. He gasped sharply, stepping backward. 410? She completely destroyed his credit score. She ruined his life before it officially started, I said. With a credit score of 410 and massive defaults attached to his record, Tyler cannot get a student loan to attend college. He cannot get an apartment lease anywhere in this city. He cannot pass a background check for an entry-level job. She sacrificed his entire future to buy counterfeit designer handbags. Malik placed both hands on his head, stepping back from the drafting table. She stole her own son's identity. She is an absolute monster. She views everyone around her as disposable collateral damage. I replied, finally closing Tyler's heartbreaking file. Suddenly, my cell phone buzzed against the wooden table, breaking the heavy silence in the office. The screen lit up with a new text message. I glanced down. It was from Brittany. I had not heard a single word from my younger half-sister in over a decade. She had certainly never checked to see if I survived the winter night I was thrown out. I picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and opened the message. Maddie, you are a monster. Mom has been crying for hours because you selfishly refused to help the family. She says she is going to end her life if this wedding gets canceled and if we lose our house. Bring the $120,000 to the family dinner at La Cour tomorrow night at 8. If you do not show up and hand over the check, I am going to expose your cruelty on TikTok and LinkedIn. I will make sure everyone in Chicago knows exactly how you abandoned your family. I stared at the glowing screen. The message was a textbook example of emotional extortion, weaponized guilt, and a desperate public threat. It was the classic Brenda playbook, executed perfectly through her highly brainwashed golden child. Brenda was using Brittany as an attack dog, feeding her a fabricated narrative of victimhood to terrorize me into immediate compliance. They genuinely expected me to bow down in a luxury restaurant, hand over a check, and save their facade. I looked up at Malik. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched in his cheek. He was staring directly at the threatening message displayed on my phone screen. The woman he was supposed to marry was defending the woman who had just committed federal wire fraud against him. "Are you going to pay them?" Malik asked, his voice low, steady, and incredibly dangerous. I smirked, closing my laptop and packing it into my leather briefcase. "I am going to bring them exactly what they deserve. Malik, I need you to be at La Cour tomorrow night, at 8 o'clock sharp. Bring your parents. Tell them it is a special pre-wedding celebration. Make sure they are dressed for the occasion." I picked up my phone, my fingers typing out my response to Brittany with absolute clinical precision. "I will be there. Tell Mom and Gregory to order the most expensive wine on the menu. I am bringing the documents. I am bringing the documents exactly as requested." 24 hours later, I stood outside Le Coeur Chicago's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant. It was a fortress of velvet booths and exorbitant prices, designed to keep ordinary people out. It was the theatrical stage Brenda required to perform her delusions of wealth. I smoothed my tailored charcoal suit. My outfit cost more than Gregory's remaining net worth. I did not walk through the doors like a victim, arriving for a scolding. I walked in like an executioner. The hostess greeted me with practiced deference, recognizing my name from the private reservation. She guided me past tables of executives toward a glass-enclosed private dining room. The ambient noise faded as she pulled the heavy acoustic door open. The scene inside the private room was a masterpiece of suburban illusion. Brenda, Gregory, Brittany, and Tyler were already seated on one side of the massive mahogany table. Brenda was draped in designer silk, a dress undoubtedly purchased using Tyler's stolen credit line. She was sipping expensive vintage champagne with a practiced, arrogant elegance. Gregory sat next to her, projecting the commanding presence of a successful patriarch. Tyler sat quietly at the end, looking deeply exhausted, staring at his water glass. Brittany sat directly across from the door. She glared at me, her eyes flashing with pure entitlement and simmering hatred. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet. Sitting across from them was Malik. He was positioned next to his parents, an esteemed orthopedic surgeon and a tenured university professor. They were people of genuine substance and hard-earned success. They were exactly the people Brenda loved to associate with to validate her fake status. Malik's face was an unreadable mask of solid stone. He had played his part perfectly, bringing his parents here under the guise of a pre-wedding celebration. He intentionally brought them here to bear witness to the absolute, humiliating collapse of Brenda's highly toxic illusion. "Well, well," Brenda chimed cheerfully, her voice echoing a little too loudly in the acoustic perfection of the private dining room. "The prodigal daughter finally shows up." She smiled brilliantly at Malik's parents, acting as if my arrival was a joyous family reunion rather than a hostile standoff. "I told you she would come around, Gregory. Blood is always thicker than water." Brenda extended a hand, palm facing up, across the pristine white tablecloth. "I assume you brought the check, Maddie? Let us not ruin a beautiful, expensive dinner with unnecessary drama today. We have so many exciting wedding details to discuss with Malik's wonderful parents. We should get the unpleasant financial business out of the way so we can celebrate properly." Malik's mother offered a polite, incredibly strained smile. She was a highly perceptive woman, clearly sensing the venom lurking just beneath Brenda's sugary surface. She looked over at her son, who gave her a microscopic shake of his head, silently telling her to let the scene play out naturally. I did not sit down. I calmly declined the chair the waiter attempted to pull out for me. I stood firmly at the head of the table, looking down at the people who had terrorized my youth and brazenly attempted to sabotage my adulthood. I maintained absolute eye contact with Brenda as I placed my leather briefcase onto the polished wood. I flicked the two brass latches open. The sharp clicks sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. "I did not bring a check, Brenda," I said. My voice echoed with absolute crystalline authority. It was steady, carrying no anger, only the chilling weight of inevitable consequences. I brought the truth. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out 4 thick manila folders, and tossed them onto the center of the table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud, rattling the crystal wine glasses and sloshing Brenda's champagne onto the cloth. "What is this?" Gregory demanded loudly. His face instantly flushed a deep, angry red. He leaned forward, attempting to use his physical size to dominate the space and intimidate me. "Stop playing these stupid games, Maddie. We are not here for your corporate theatrics. You know exactly why you are here tonight. Hand over the money and sit down immediately." I completely ignored his aggressive outburst. I kept my eyes locked on the folders sitting in the middle of the table. They contained the financial autopsy of their entire existence. The federal tax evasion records, the property foreclosure notices, the internet protocol trace of the cyber attack, and the devastating credit reports. Everything required to dismantle them legally, financially, and socially was sitting right there in front of the overpriced appetizers. "Open them," I commanded, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy tension in the room. I shifted my gaze away from Gregory and stared directly at my 19-year-old half-brother. "Tyler, I want you to open the blue folder immediately." Brenda let out a nervous, breathless laugh, reaching her hand out rapidly as if to intercept the documents before they could be touched. Maddie, this is highly inappropriate. We have esteemed guests present. We can review whatever boring business proposals you brought later tonight. I said, open the folder, Tyler. I repeated my tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or delay. Tyler, looking deeply confused and visibly terrified by the sudden shift in the room's energy, reached forward with trembling hands. He pulled the blue folder toward his chest. He hesitated for a brief second, glancing at his mother who was now staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. Then he flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. Inside was the comprehensive, unredacted federal credit report I had pulled using my firm's high-level forensic access. He stared down at the dense pages of financial data, his eyes darting back and forth across the numbers in utter confusion. He looked up at me, his brow furrowed silently, pleading for a logical explanation for the absolute nightmare printed on those terrifying pages. "What is this?" Tyler finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper. He dropped the blue folder onto the white tablecloth as if it were burning his skin. $45,000 in credit card debt. I do not even have a credit card. I just graduated high school. Why does this official federal report say my credit score is 410? Because your mother stole your identity when you were 14, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. I kept my eyes locked on him, ensuring he heard every brutal word. She opened 6 high-limit credit cards in your name. She used your social security number to bypass the limits on her ruined accounts. She used your future to buy designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, and those weekly country club lunches she loves to boast about. She maxed out every single card and intentionally defaulted on all of them. Tyler's face went completely ashen. He turned slowly toward Brenda, who was suddenly clutching her champagne flute like a lifeline. Tyler's voice cracked, breaking the perfect facade she had spent decades curating. Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is a mistake. Brenda stammered desperately. Tyler, sweetheart, you do not understand. We just had a tough month. I was going to pay it back. Maddie is twisting things to make us look bad. I am not twisting a single financial fact, I countered effortlessly. You cannot get a student loan, Tyler. You cannot rent an apartment. You cannot even pass a basic background check for an entry-level corporate job. She completely destroyed your financial future before you even had a chance to start your life. The absolute devastation hitting Tyler was palpable. But this was only the beginning of the financial autopsy. I turned my attention away from my shattered brother and locked my gaze onto Gregory. He was shifting uncomfortably in his plush chair, his face slick with a sudden cold sweat. The illusion of the wealthy suburban patriarch was melting off his bones. You see, I continued, my voice, carrying the clinical detachment of an auditor. The sheer greed in this family is a bottomless pit. But stealing from a teenager was not enough to keep the charade afloat. A country club lifestyle requires a constant influx of cash, and when Brenda exhausted Tyler's credit, Gregory decided to get creative. I reached across the table and slid the second manila folder directly in front of him. A bright red tab stuck out from the side, a universally recognized marker for federal intervention. Gregory stared at the folder, refusing to touch it. "Shut your mouth, Maddie," he warned, his voice low and vibrating with a panicked threat. "You have no idea what you are talking about. You have no right to bring personal business to this table." "It became my business the moment you barged into my office and demanded $120,000, I stated firmly. "Open the folder, Gregory. Let everyone see the massive red flag my forensic team found buried in the federal tax databases." When he refused to move, I leaned forward and flipped the cover open myself. The official seal of the Internal Revenue Service gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Malik and his parents leaned slightly to the side, maintaining their composed silence while actively witnessing the total collapse of the family sitting across from them. Brittany watched the scene unfold with wide, horrified eyes, her hand hovering near her diamond engagement ring. Gregory did not just lose his money in terrible real estate deals I announced to the room, ensuring Malik's parents heard every detail of the fraud they had almost married into. He took out multiple highly leveraged loans against his suburban mansion and poured the cash into volatile offshore cryptocurrency trading. He was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of generational wealth. He lost absolutely everything in those aggressive trades. But the real crime is what he tried to hide from the federal government. Gregory's chest was heaving. He gripped the edge of the dining table, his knuckles turning stark white. Brenda sat paralyzed, the color fully drained from her perfectly contoured face. He is under active investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for severe, multi-year tax evasion. I explained, delivering the lethal blow with pinpoint accuracy. He deliberately hid offshore assets and failed to report capital gains. The federal auditors caught him. The penalty and the back taxes he currently owes to avoid federal prosecution and a lengthy prison sentence is exactly $120,000. The precise number hit the room with the force of a physical strike. Brittany gasped, finally connecting the dots. Tyler buried his face in his hands. That demand for $70,000 for tuition and $50,000 for a wedding venue was a complete and total fabrication, I said, looking directly at Brenda, who was now trembling visibly. You did not storm into my boardroom to fight for your children's future. You came to extort me because Gregory is weeks away from being indicted by federal prosecutors. You tried to use your children as human shields to cover up a felony. You were willing to bleed me dry just to keep Gregory out of a federal penitentiary and maintain your pathetic fake country club facade. The claustrophobia of their suburban greed had finally caught up to them. They had spent their entire lives judging others acting superior and manipulating their way into wealthy social circles. They drove cars they did not own and wore clothes purchased with stolen identities. They were nothing but financial parasites wrapped in silk and cheap cologne. The absolute hollowness of their existence was exposed on the white tablecloth, illuminated by the warm lighting of the establishment they could no longer afford to visit. Brittany's hands were shaking violently as she reached for her wine glass. She took a massive gulp, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. She slammed the glass down, spilling Pinot Noir across the table. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Stop ruining this dinner, Maddie! You are just jealous because Mom actually loves us. You are making all of this up to destroy my wedding." I turned my attention to my half-sister. "I am not ruining anything, Brittany," I replied, of my voice dangerously calm. "You ruined it yourself when you sent me that text message yesterday. The one where you called me a monster, threatened to expose me on social media, and demanded I bring a $120,000 check to save this pathetic facade." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a high-quality color printout of her exact text message. I slid it across the table. Malik's mother pressed her lips into a thin, disgusted line. "You knew," Malik said. He turned his head slowly to look at the woman he had intended to marry. "You knew your mother was stealing from me." Brittany froze. The color drained completely from her face. "Malik, no, babe. I swear I did not know anything about a stolen identity. Mom just said she needed a temporary bridge loan to secure the venue because the funds were temporarily tied up." "A bridge loan?" Malik stood up from his chair. The physical presence of his intense anger sucked the oxygen out of the room. He reached into his tailored jacket. "Your mother logged into my private firm's secure network, used my administrative credentials, and took out a $60,000 personal loan using my social security number. She committed federal wire fraud, and you sat there and helped her pick out floral arrangements funded by a felony." "I didn't know the truth," Brittany wailed, reaching across to grab his sleeve. Malik stepped back sharply, pulling his arm away, as if her physical touch was repulsive. You enabled her completely. You watched her drain your own teenage brother's life into a credit score of 410, and you did absolutely nothing but demand that Maddie pay for your vanity. You are exactly like her. Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box containing the diamond engagement ring. He had demanded it back from Brittany earlier that afternoon, claiming it needed to be resized before the dinner. He opened the box, pulled out the massive diamond ring, and dropped it directly onto the center of the table. The heavy platinum band hit the wood with a sharp clatter. "There is no wedding," Malik announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I am canceling the venue first thing in the morning. I am canceling everything we built." Brittany let out a harrowing scream. She lunged across the table, her manicured hands grasping desperately for the ring, knocking over her empty wine glass in the chaotic process. "Malik, please! You cannot do this to me. The invitations are already out. Everyone is coming. You are humiliating me." "You humiliated yourself," Malik fired back, his tone absolute. "My attorney is submitting the formal identity theft and fraud report to the Federal Bureau of Investigation tomorrow morning. Brenda is going to face severe criminal charges for what she did to my business and my personal credit. I want absolutely nothing to do with this toxic family. You disgust me." Malik turned away and looked to his parents. They did not say a single word to Brenda or Gregory. They turned their backs and walked out of the dining room. Malik followed without looking back. Brittany collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her arms and sobbing hysterically. "Shut your mouth," Gregory finally roared, slamming his heavy fists onto the table and rising aggressively to his feet. He pointed a trembling, rage-filled finger directly at my face. "You orchestrated every single piece of this. You came here deliberately to destroy us." "I came here because you summoned me," I corrected him, refusing to break eye contact or flinch at his physical posturing. "You demanded I show up and pay for your crimes." "You think you are so brilliant, Maddie," Gregory shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you can walk in here and ruin our lives just because you sit in a corner office and have a fancy corporate title. You still owe us. We took you in when nobody else wanted you. You owe us for raising you." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my voice slicing flawlessly through his pathetic temper tantrum. I reached back into my leather briefcase for the final time tonight. I pulled out a thick document enclosed in a premium blue legal folder. It was heavily stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Sheriff's Department. I held it up for Gregory to see clearly. "You demanded $120,000 from me to pay off the Internal Revenue Service so you would not go to federal prison for massive tax evasion. You leveraged your house 3 times over for your failed cryptocurrency gambling. But here is the grand finale of your corporate audit, Gregory." I tossed the legal document directly onto his empty porcelain dinner plate. "My firm represents the exact hedge fund that purchased the toxic debt portfolio from your regional bank," I explained, leaning in closer to the table to ensure he heard every single syllable of his total demise. "Yesterday afternoon, I personally purchased the defaulted mortgage on your suburban mansion. I own your house, Gregory." Gregory stared down at the blue folder sitting on his plate. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. "And as the sole legal owner of that property," I continued, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper that carried perfectly across the ruined dinner table, "I personally signed the formal eviction notice this morning. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my property before the county sheriff arrives to physically remove you and throw your counterfeit designer luggage out onto the street." Brenda let out a choked, breathless gasp, clutching her chest tightly as if she were having a sudden heart attack. "Maddie, you cannot do this to us. We will be completely homeless. Where are we supposed to go? Maybe you can pitch a tent in the snow, I suggested coldly. It builds great character and independence. That is exactly what you told me 15 years ago when you left me outside to freeze. As Brenda gasped for air, staring down at the eviction notice with wide, terrified eyes, I allowed myself a single, deeply satisfied smirk. She was finally experiencing the exact terror she had inflicted upon me all those years ago. The utter shock on her face was a masterpiece, but it had not materialized by accident. This entire sequence of absolute destruction had been meticulously orchestrated. It had been set into motion 24 hours earlier, right in the middle of Malik's architectural firm, the moment Brittany sent her pathetic extortion attempt. I remembered standing over Malik's drafting table, reading her demand for $120,000 under the threat of social media exposure. I had smirked at her brazen stupidity. I looked at Malik, who was still reeling from the sudden discovery of his stolen identity, and gave him his specific instructions. "You need to bring your parents to Liqueur tomorrow night," I had told him firmly. "Bring them so they can witness exactly who they are dealing with before you legally bind yourself to this family." He had agreed without hesitation, the betrayal hardening his resolve into stone. I had then picked up my phone and texted my sister back. "I will be there. Tell Mom and Gregory to order the most expensive wine on the menu. I am bringing the documents." I knew the promise of expensive wine and a perceived surrender would guarantee their attendance. They were far too arrogant to suspect a trap. Leaving Malik to process the end of his engagement, I returned to my corporate office in the heart of Chicago's financial district. The skyscraper was quiet humming with the low energy of late afternoon productivity. This was the calm before the storm. I walked straight past my receptionist and instructed her to hold all my calls for the remainder of the day. I needed absolute focus. I sat down at my desk and immediately dialed Harrison, my lead corporate attorney. Harrison was a legal shark, a man who navigated corporate litigation and hostile financial acquisitions with lethal precision. "Harrison, I need to execute a highly aggressive asset acquisition before the close of business today," I had instructed him through the speakerphone. "I need to purchase a specific portfolio of toxic debt from a regional bank, and I need the property deed transferred to my holding company immediately." Harrison did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply asked for the property address. When I provided Gregory and Brenda's suburban mansion, I heard the rapid typing of his keyboard on the other end of the line. "The property is currently in deep foreclosure," Harrison had confirmed minutes later. "The bank is highly motivated to offload the toxic asset. We can acquire the defaulted mortgage for pennies on the dollar, but we have to bypass standard escrow to expedite the transfer." I authorized the massive wire transfer from my firm's private capital reserves without a single second of hesitation. Buying their debt was not a financial investment. It was an investment in pure, unadulterated justice. A necessary step to permanently strip them of their false superiority. While Harrison handled the aggressive legal maneuvering to secure the deed and file the appropriate county paperwork, I set to work preparing the heavy ammunition for the upcoming dinner. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in the quiet, focused solitude of my executive office, compiling the physical evidence of their systemic fraud. I was executing precise legal and financial maneuvers in the shadows, ensuring that every single printed document was legally certified and completely irrefutable in a court of law. I gathered the federal tax evasion logs, detailing Gregory's hidden offshore cryptocurrency accounts. I printed the comprehensive credit reports showing Tyler's ruined financial identity and the 6 maxed-out credit cards Brenda had opened using his social security number. I compiled the Internet Protocol trace reports proving Brenda had committed federal wire fraud using Malik's network to attack my corporate clients, printing duplicate copies for law enforcement. I meticulously organized this mountain of devastating evidence into 4 specific manila folders. One for Tyler, one for Malik, one for Gregory, one for Brenda. Each folder was a highly customized, lethal weapon designed to explicitly dismantle a specific pillar of their fake suburban illusion. I placed the freshly signed eviction notice, rush delivered by Harrison's private courier, directly into Gregory's personalized folder. I then called my confidential contacts at the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the local police department, forwarding them the digital copies of the fraud evidence through a secured server. I provided them with the exact time and location of the dinner reservation. I wanted the authorities waiting outside the restaurant the moment the truth was finally revealed. The trap had been laid with the absolute precision of a seasoned forensic auditor. I had engineered their downfall perfectly, leaving absolutely no margin for error or escape. Now standing at the head of the long table in the private dining room of Le Coeur, watching Gregory stare blankly at his own eviction notice, the reality of my meticulous preparation was tearing their fake lives apart. The 4 manila folders sitting on the white tablecloth had done exactly what they were designed to do. Brenda was weeping openly, her designer silk dress doing nothing to hide her absolute ruin. Gregory's face was purple with impotent rage, his large hands trembling violently as he gripped the eviction papers. Brittany was still sobbing loudly on the floor over her canceled wedding, and Tyler looked completely broken by the horrible revelation of his stolen identity. They were entirely trapped in a permanent cage of their own making. I looked at Gregory, who was struggling to formulate a coherent response to his sudden, impending homelessness. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water, silently savoring the absolute and undeniable taste of complete victory. And right on cue, the bright reflection of flashing red and blue police lights began to illuminate the dark soundproof windows of the upscale restaurant. The authorities had officially arrived to collect their long overdue dues. The red and blue lights from the street outside cut through the opulent dimness of the restaurant, throwing harsh, jagged shadows across the crystal glassware and the ruined feast. The heavy acoustic doors of the private dining room swung open not by the polite hands of a waiter, but by 2 Chicago police officers and a plainclothes financial crimes detective. Brenda, Gregory, Brittany, and Tyler sat completely frozen still, dripping in their stolen designer clothes. The visual contrast between their illegally funded luxury and the grim, undeniable reality of law enforcement entering the room was absolute poetry. Malik and his esteemed parents had already stepped out into the main corridor, but they remained standing just beyond the glass threshold, silently watching the final act of this toxic suburban tragedy unfold. The lead detective, a tall woman with a sharp, uncompromising gaze, stepped right up to the mahogany table. She did not care about the Michelin-starred menu or the velvet seating. She held a clipboard and a pair of steel handcuffs. "Gregory and Brenda," she announced, her voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "We have active warrants for your arrest regarding multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe tax evasion." In a final, desperately pathetic bid to maintain her shattered facade, Brenda attempted to play the benevolent, forgiving matriarch right in front of the officers and Malik's watching parents. She stood up shakily, smoothing her fraudulent silk dress with trembling fingers, and forced a highly unstable artificial smile onto her pale face. "Officers, please! There is a terrible misunderstanding here," she stammered, her voice pitching high with panic. "This is just a private family dispute over some temporary bridge loans. It is nothing criminal. We are respectable people." She turned her manic gaze to me, eagerly extending her hand across the white tablecloth. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, assuming I had finally surrendered to the public pressure of the situation. "Maddie, sweetheart, please tell them," Brenda begged her, voice cracking. "Tell them you are helping us sort this out. Just write the $120,000 check right now to clear the balance. We can pay the fines and clear this entire misunderstanding up tonight." You came here to save us, remember? Hand me the check, Maddie, and we can all go home together like a real family. The tension in the room was agonizing, thick enough to choke on. Tyler was weeping silently into his hands, mourning his ruined credit score and stolen future. Brittany was shivering, staring at the flashing police lights as the reality of her canceled wedding and impending homelessness finally sank in. I did not sit down. I did not soften my posture or show a single ounce of familial mercy. I remained standing firmly at the head of the table, projecting the absolute authority of a chief executive officer who had just successfully executed a hostile takeover. I looked at Brenda's extended, trembling hand. Then I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the 4 thick, meticulously organized manila folders I had prepared in my office earlier that afternoon. I held them up for a brief second, letting the weight of the evidence hang in the air. I turned my attention away from my mother and looked directly at the lead detective. I dropped the 4 folders onto the table, letting them hit the crystal centerpiece with a heavy, resounding thud that echoed off the glass walls. I didn't bring a check, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute, icy clarity. I brought truth. I pushed the heavy stack of folders across the smooth wood directly toward the detective. Here is the comprehensive physical evidence I stated clinically, ensuring Malik's parents heard every single word of my forensic breakdown. You will find the verified internet protocol traces proving the corporate cyber attack originated from stolen credentials. You will find the financial logs documenting the stolen social security numbers belonging to both Malik and my 19-year-old brother Tyler. You will find the complete banking history of Gregory's hidden offshore cryptocurrency accounts and the forged loan documents Brenda signed just yesterday morning to steal $60,000. The detective picked up the folders, flipping open the top cover. She nodded in deep appreciation of the meticulous, ready-to-prosecute forensic accounting I had handed her on a silver platter. "This is highly thorough," she noted, handing the clipboard to her partner. "Thank you for your cooperation in this investigation." She signaled the 2 uniformed officers standing directly behind her. "Hands behind your backs, please," the officer instructed, stepping purposefully toward Gregory and Brenda. Gregory tried to resist. He puffed his chest out one last time in a pathetic, desperate display of alpha male dominance, raising his voice to shout loudly at the officers. "You cannot do this! I am a highly respected businessman. My stepdaughter is setting us up. This is extortion." The officer did not hesitate. He swiftly grabbed Gregory's arm, spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly through the luxurious private dining room, slicing perfectly through the remnants of their country club illusion. Brenda screamed as the second officer secured her wrists, her fake designer handbag tumbling to the floor and spilling its contents across the expensive carpeting. "You ungrateful, selfish girl!" Brenda shrieked at me, abandoning her benevolent matriarch routine entirely as the cold steel locked tightly around her wrists. "I gave you life. I raised you. You owe me everything. And you are throwing me in a cage like an animal?" "You threw yourself in a cage the moment you decided to steal from your own children to fund your vanity," I replied, my expression completely unchanging as the officers hauled them away. "I simply provided the lock and the key. I watched with absolute detachment. The profound reckoning was finally complete." The echo of my final statement hung in the air of the private dining room. I did not bring a check. I brought the truth. The heavy silence that followed was suffocating. Gregory's face twisted into a mask of pure indignation, his fists clenched tightly on top of the pristine white tablecloth. Brenda sat perfectly still, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from her carefully contoured face. Her eyes darted toward the 4 thick manila folders I had dropped onto the crystal centerpiece. She knew exactly what I did for a living, and deep down, she knew she had left a paper trail of absolute destruction. I did not give them a single moment to recover or spin a new narrative. I reached forward, my movements slow and deliberate, and pulled the first manila folder from the top of the stack. It had a bright blue tab. I slid it across the smooth mahogany table. It glided effortlessly, stopping directly in front of my 19-year-old half-brother. Tyler stared down at the blue folder, as if it were a venomous snake. He was wearing a tailored designer suit that fit him perfectly, a luxury garment that cost more than my first car. He was the golden child, the boy who had been given the bedroom I was thrown out of, the son who had never known a single day of struggle or sacrifice. "Open it, Tyler," I commanded, my voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. It was the clinical, absolute tone of a forensic auditor delivering the final verdict. Tyler looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. He glanced sideways at Brenda, silently asking for permission or an explanation. Brenda's manicured hands began to tremble. She reached out quickly, attempting to pull the folder away from him. "Do not touch that, Maddie," Brenda snapped, her voice pitching high with sudden, desperate panic. "We are at a nice restaurant. We have esteemed guests present. We are not doing this right now. You are being completely inappropriate and vindictive." I stepped forward, planting my hands firmly on the table and leaning in. "If you touch that folder, Brenda, I will have the police walk into this restaurant and arrest you for federal identity theft before the appetizers arrive." I shifted my gaze back to my brother. "Open the folder, Tyler. Read what is inside." Tyler swallowed hard. His hands shook slightly as he reached forward and flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. Inside was the comprehensive, unredacted federal credit report I had pulled using my firm's secure governmental access portal. The pages were dense with financial data, highlighted rows of debt and aggressive collection notices. Tyler stared down at the complex financial jargon. His brow furrowed in deep confusion as his eyes darted back and forth across the numbers. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. He looked up at me, completely lost. "It says I have $45,000 in credit card debt. That makes no sense. I do not even own a credit card. I just graduated high school." "Keep reading," I instructed coldly. "Look at the top right corner of the dashboard summary. Read your official credit score out loud for the table." Tyler moved his finger across the page. 410, he read aloud, the confusion in his voice slowly giving way to a creeping sense of dread. "What does a 410 credit score mean? Why are there 6 different bank accounts listed under my name?" "It means your financial future is completely dead," I explained, slicing through the quiet room like a scalpel. "It means you cannot qualify for a federal student loan to attend your university. It means you cannot sign an apartment lease anywhere in the country. It means you cannot pass a basic background check for an entry-level corporate job." "But how?" Tyler stammered, his eyes frantically searching the documents. "How did this happen?" "Because your mother stole your identity when you were 14 years old," I stated, making sure every single person in the room heard the absolute truth. Malik and his parents sat perfectly still, witnessing the horrific reality of the family sitting across from them. "She used your social security number to bypass the limits on her own ruined accounts. She opened 6 high-limit credit cards in your name, Tyler. She used your future to buy designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, and those weekly country club lunches she loves to boast about." Tyler's face went completely ashen. The golden child illusion was shattering into pieces right in front of my eyes. He looked at the tailored suit he was currently wearing, suddenly realizing it was bought with his own stolen future. "She maxed out every single card and intentionally defaulted on all of them," I continued relentlessly. "She sacrificed your entire life to fund her fake upper-class suburban facade," Mom Tyler choked out. He turned slowly toward Brenda. His voice was entirely broken. Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Brenda's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the room, her eyes wide with trapped, desperate panic. She reached out to grab Tyler's arm, but he flinched and pulled away violently. Tyler, sweetheart, you do not understand how hard things have been, Brenda stammered, tears welling up in her eyes as she immediately tried to play the victim. It was just a temporary bridge loan. I needed to keep our family afloat. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay it back. Maddie is just twisting things to be cruel because she is jealous of us. She is trying to tear our family apart. I am not twisting a single financial fact I countered effortlessly. A bridge loan implies an intention to repay. You have not made a single minimum payment on those accounts in over 14 months. You let them go to aggressive collections. You let his name get dragged through the dirt while you sat at the country club sipping champagne. I trusted you, Tyler wept, burying his face in his hands. The sound of his sobbing echoed through the glass-enclosed room. You ruined my life. I cannot go to college. I have nothing. Brenda stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you do this to him, Maddie? She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are a monster. You came here just to hurt your own brother. You could have easily paid that debt for him with your massive corporate salary, but instead, you chose to humiliate us. I will never pay for your crimes, Brenda, I replied with absolute, unyielding coldness. I am not your victim anymore, and I refuse to be your savior. Tyler is learning the exact same lesson I learned 15 years ago in the snow. Your love is nothing but a financial transaction, and when the money runs out, you leave your children to freeze. The sound of Tyler weeping over his destroyed future was suddenly drowned out by the violent scraping of a chair. Brittany shot up from her seat, her face flushed with indignant rage. She slammed both hands flat against the table, glaring at me as if I were the one who had just committed financial treason. Stop it, right now! Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the private dining room. Stop ruining this dinner, Maddie. You are just jealous because Mom actually loves us. You are making all of this up to destroy my wedding. You walked in here just to show off your money and make us feel bad. I did not even blink at her outburst. I simply stood there, perfectly still, letting her childish tantrum burn itself out completely. I am not ruining anything, Brittany, I replied, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. You ruined it yourself when you sent me that text message yesterday. The one where you called me a monster, threatened to expose me on social media, and demanded I bring a $120,000 check to save this pathetic facade. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a high-quality color printout of her exact text message. I slid it across the smooth wood of the table. Malik's mother pressed her lips into a thin, disgusted line as she read the printed words. She was a brilliant woman who instantly saw through the manipulation. Malik himself did not look at the paper. He turned his head slowly to look at the woman he had intended to marry. You knew, Malik said. His voice was completely drained of warmth. It was low, precise, and absolutely lethal. Brittany froze mid-rant. The aggressive color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and pale. She blinked rapidly, her arrogant posture crumbling in a split second. Malik, no, babe, she stammered, her voice instantly dropping an octave to a desperate, placating whine. I swear, I did not know anything about a stolen identity. Mom just said she needed a temporary bridge loan to secure the venue because the funds were temporarily tied up in investments. She said she was fixing the cash flow issue, a bridge loan. Malik repeated, standing up slowly from his chair. The sheer physical presence of his intense anger seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He had demanded the engagement ring back from Brittany earlier that afternoon, claiming it needed to be professionally cleaned and resized before the celebratory dinner. It was a tactical move I had advised him to make to protect his assets. He pulled out the black velvet box, opened it, and extracted the massive diamond ring. He held it up for a fraction of a second before dropping it directly onto the center of the table. The heavy platinum band hit the polished mahogany with a sharp, harsh clatter that made Brenda physically jump in her seat. "Your mother logged into my private architectural firm's secure network," Malik said, his eyes burning into Brittany's terrified face. "She used my personal administrative credentials and took out a $60,000 personal loan using my social security number. She committed federal wire fraud, and you sat there and helped her pick out floral arrangements funded by a felony." "I didn't know the full truth," Brittany wailed, reaching across the table to grab his sleeve. "I thought she was just borrowing it." Malik stepped back sharply, pulling his arm away, as if her physical touch was actively repulsive to him. "You enabled her completely. You watched her drain your own teenage brother's life into a credit score of 410, and you did absolutely nothing but demand that Maddie pay for your vanity. You knew she was manipulating the accounts. You knew she was lying to me, and you protected her instead of protecting our future. You are exactly like her." "There is no wedding," Malik announced, turning his back on her tears. "I am canceling the venue first thing in the morning. I am canceling the caterers, the band, and every single vendor. I am canceling everything we built together." Brittany let out a harrowing, agonizing scream. It was the sound of her entire fake reality being torn away. She lunged across the table, knocking over her empty wine glass, in a chaotic, desperate attempt to grab the discarded ring. "Malik, please. You cannot do this to me. The invitations are already out. Everyone is coming. My friends will laugh at me. You are humiliating me in front of your parents." "You humiliated yourself," Malik fired back, his tone carrying absolute, unyielding finality. "My attorney is submitting the formal identity theft and fraud report to the Federal Bureau of Investigation tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Brenda is going to face severe criminal charges for what she did to my business network and my personal credit. I want absolutely nothing to do with this toxic, parasitical family. You disgust me completely." Malik turned away from the table and looked to his parents. The esteemed surgeon and the university professor stood up with quiet, absolute dignity. They did not say a single word to Brenda or Gregory. They did not need to. Their silent, profound disgust spoke volumes. They turned their backs on the weeping, broken family and walked confidently out of the private dining room. Malik followed them, immediately, his head held high, leaving his ruined engagement sitting on the table. Brittany collapsed backward. Her knees gave out and she sank onto the floor of the private dining room, burying her face in her arms and sobbing hysterically. Her designer silk dress pooled around her on the carpet, looking utterly pathetic. The air in the room was heavy thick with the stench of exposed secrets and absolute defeat. Brenda was staring at the doorway, her mouth hanging open, unable to process the speed at which her ultimate social climbing victory had been snatched away. Gregory was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his arrogant suburban armor. Tyler remained in his seat, still paralyzed by the blue folder sitting in front of him, silently weeping for the future that had been stolen from him. I watched the entire scene unfold with the clinical detachment of an auditor finalizing a report. There was no joy in this destruction, only the cold, satisfying realization that the universe was finally balancing its ledger. The people who had ruthlessly discarded me in the snow were now drowning in the icy consequences of their own choices. But the audit was not completely finished. There was still one folder left on the table, and the most dangerous man in the room was finally realizing he had run out of human shields. Gregory slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes dark with a violent, desperate rage. His entire life was collapsing rapidly, and he desperately needed someone to blame for it. I stood completely ready to face his pathetic wrath head-on, knowing that my final piece of evidence would easily break him forever. "Shut your mouth!" Gregory finally roared. The sound violently shattered the remaining quiet of the private dining room. He slammed both of his heavy fists onto the polished mahogany table with such extreme force that the remaining crystal wine glasses tipped over instantly. Deep red liquid spilled across the pristine white linen tablecloth like a rapidly spreading wound. He rose aggressively to his feet, his large frame looming menacingly in the dim light. His face was a mottled, dangerous shade of purple, and the thick veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. He pointed a trembling, rage-filled finger directly at my face, stepping around the table to close the distance between us. "You orchestrated every piece of this!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You came here deliberately to destroy us. You set my wife up. You ruined my daughter's wedding. You broke this family apart out of vindictive spite. You think you are so brilliant. You think you can walk in here and ruin our lives because you sit in a corner office? You still owe us. We took you in when nobody wanted you. You owe us for raising you." I did not flinch. I did not step back, and I certainly did not lower my gaze. I stood my ground perfectly, watching him unravel with the clinical detachment of a seasoned professional analyzing a failing asset. His sudden explosive anger was not a display of true strength. It was the desperate, pathetic flailing of a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated smoothly, my voice slicing flawlessly through his pathetic temper tantrum. "I did not force Brenda to commit federal identity theft, and I did not force you to hide your money from the Internal Revenue Service. I simply refused to pay the ransom for your colossal mistakes. You destroyed your own family, Gregory. I just handed you the receipt." Gregory lunged forward another step, his breathing ragged and heavy. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. I am a highly respected businessman in this city. This is just a temporary cash flow problem. I will call my bankers tomorrow morning. I will restructure the debt. I will fix this, and then I am going to sue you for defamation and harassment. You will not get away with this." I smiled. It was a slow, calculating smile that instantly made the aggressive posturing drain right out of his rigid shoulders. I reached back into my leather briefcase for the third time tonight. "You cannot call your bankers tomorrow morning, Gregory," I said, pulling out a thick document enclosed in a premium blue legal folder. It was heavily stamped with official corporate seals. "Your regional bank no longer owns your highly toxic debt portfolio. They deemed your accounts unrecoverable due to the active federal tax evasion investigation. They bundled your defaulted mortgages and leveraged personal loans, then sold them off to a private hedge fund for pennies on the dollar to clear their ledgers." Gregory stopped moving. The angry flush on his face faded, rapidly replaced by a sickly pale realization. He knew exactly what it meant when a debt was sold to a ruthless private equity firm. It meant no negotiations, no extensions, and zero mercy. "They cannot do that without notifying me," he stammered, his voice losing its thunderous volume. "They legally notified you 30 days ago via certified mail," I corrected him effortlessly. "You simply ignored the notices, pretending the problem would magically disappear if you ignored it long enough. But the problem did not disappear. It escalated. And here is the grand finale of your corporate audit, Gregory." I held the heavy blue folder up for him to see clearly under the chandelier light. "My financial forensic firm actively represents the exact hedge fund that purchased the toxic debt portfolio from your bank," I explained, leaning in closer to the table to ensure he heard every single syllable of his total demise. "We manage their distressed asset acquisitions. When I saw your name flag in our internal system this afternoon, I made a very specific, highly motivated, personal investment decision." Gregory stared at the blue folder. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The air completely left his lungs as the horrifying reality of my words began to take shape in his mind. Yesterday afternoon, before I even agreed to attend this miserable dinner, I executed an aggressive corporate maneuver. I continued, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper that carried perfectly across the ruined dining room. I authorized a massive wire transfer from my private capital reserves. I bypassed the standard escrow process to expedite the transfer of the specific toxic assets tied to your name. I opened the blue folder and pulled out a single heavily embossed piece of paper. I dropped the legal document directly onto his empty porcelain dinner plate. It landed right in the center, framing the undeniable truth of his absolute failure. I personally purchased the defaulted mortgage on your suburban mansion, I announced, watching his eyes dart frantically down to the paperwork on his plate. I own your house, Gregory. I own the roof over your head. I own the very ground you walk on. I am officially your landlord. Gregory's knees visibly buckled. He reached out and gripped the edge of the table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor next to Brittany. He stared at the property deed sitting on his plate. His name was crossed out on the top line, and my corporate holding company was listed as the sole proprietor of the estate. Brenda let out a choked gasp from her side of the table. She clutched her chest tightly, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she stared at the deed. Maddie, you cannot do this. You cannot take our beautiful home away. We will be entirely ruined. You are systematically destroying our entire lives. I am merely foreclosing on the consequences of your own actions, Brenda, I said, shifting my gaze from Gregory's paralyzed form to my mother's panicked face. You systematically destroyed your own lives the moment you decided to fund your vanity with stolen money. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I retrieved a crisp white envelope and placed it squarely on top of the property deed sitting on Gregory's plate. It was the formal 24-hour eviction notice. I leaned in close, bracing my hands on the mahogany table, ensuring Gregory and Brenda heard every single syllable of their demise. As the legal owner of the estate, I have officially ordered the county sheriff to execute a forced vacancy tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever items you legally own, which, considering the extent of your massive credit fraud, is virtually nothing. If you are found on the premises after the deadline, you will be arrested for trespassing on private property. Gregory stared at the white envelope as if it contained a live explosive. He opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The reality of his impending homelessness had completely short-circuited his arrogant brain. He was drowning in his own colossal mistakes. Brenda let out a high-pitched, keening wail. She grabbed Gregory's arm, shaking him violently. Do something, Gregory. Tell her she cannot do this. Call your lawyers. Call the police right now to stop her. I would not bother calling the police, Brenda. I interrupted, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy, because I already called them for you. The sudden chilling finality of my statement made the entire room freeze. Even Brittany stopped her hysterical sobbing on the floor and looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Tyler shrank back into his chair, trying to make himself invisible. The oxygen left the room entirely. What do you mean you called the police? Gregory asked, his voice cracking into a pathetic high register. I stood up straight, carefully adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal suit. I am a federally licensed financial forensic auditor, Gregory. When I uncover active financial crimes during a corporate audit, I am legally obligated to report them to the proper authorities immediately. And your personal audit was spectacularly incriminating. I gestured to the 4 manila folders scattered across the dining table. This afternoon, right after I purchased your defaulted mortgage, I compiled the digital evidence of your extensive tax evasion, your hidden offshore cryptocurrency accounts, and Brenda's massive identity theft ring. I sent the entire encrypted package directly to my contacts at the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the local police department. I filed the formal criminal reports at precisely 3 o'clock today. Brenda's face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. You reported us to the federal authorities. You reported your own mother? I reported a ruthless thief who stole my brother's future and a fraudster who hijacked an innocent man's corporate network. I corrected her sharply. I reported a dangerous criminal. Gregory lunged across the table, his earlier paralysis vanishing into a sudden explosive burst of panicked violence. He reached out to grab my throat, his hands curled into violent claws. You treacherous little brat! I will totally destroy you! I did not flinch or retreat an inch. The heavy, soundproof glass door of the private dining room suddenly swung open before Gregory could even touch my lapel. My security guard Davis stepped into the room with absolute authority. He grabbed Gregory by the collar of his expensive suit and slammed him back into his chair, with a force that rattled the remaining silverware on the table. Sit down and keep your hands to yourself, Davis ordered, his voice rumbling like thunder in the confined space. Make another move toward my boss and I will physically restrain you until the authorities arrive. Gregory slumped back into his seat, breathing heavily, completely neutralized by Davis's presence. Brenda let out a pathetic whimpering cry, pressing her trembling hands tightly to her face. You cannot do this to us, Maddie, Brenda sobbed, her tears completely ruining her expensive makeup. We will go to federal prison. We will lose absolutely everything. You have to call them back. Tell them you made a massive mistake. Tell them it was all just a simple misunderstanding between family members. There are no simple misunderstandings in a forensic audit, Brenda, I replied coldly. Only numbers. And your numbers clearly spell out multiple federal felonies. Right on cue, the faint, high-pitched wail of approaching sirens began to echo down the bustling Chicago street outside the restaurant. The sound grew steadily louder, cutting directly through the ambient noise of the upscale dining room. The flashing reflection of red and blue emergency lights started to bounce off the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the terrified faces of my toxic family. Brenda gasped, jumping up from her chair and rushing to the window. She peered through the glass, her hands trembling violently against the pane. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, spinning around to face Gregory. "They are here! The police are pulling up to the front entrance! Gregory, what do we do? We have to leave immediately. We have to use the back door right now." "There is no escape, Brenda," I stated calmly, watching her frantic, rat-like panic unfold before me. The authorities have copies of all these financial documents. They have your physical address, your banking information, and your current location. Running will only add resisting arrest to your long list of incoming federal charges. The grim reality of her absolute, inescapable doom finally crashed down on her shoulders. Brenda collapsed onto her knees right next to Brittany, clutching her chest tightly as she hyperventilated on the carpet. The golden child and the narcissistic mother were finally reduced to a weeping, pathetic pile on the floor. The heavy acoustic doors of the private dining room swung open for the final time. The maitre d' stepped aside, making way for the authorities. Two uniformed Chicago police officers walked in, flanked by a pair of plainclothes detectives from the Federal Financial Crimes Division. The lead detective, a tall man with a sharp, uncompromising jawline, swept his piercing gaze across the ruined dining table. He did not care about the Michelin-starred menu or the velvet seating. He was here to collect. "Gregory and Brenda Hayes," the detective announced. His voice, a flat, booming baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation. "We have active warrants for your arrest regarding multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe tax evasion. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs.
Gregory stared at the detectives, his aggressive bravado entirely evaporated. He looked like a deflated balloon, his large frame suddenly appearing incredibly small and fragile. He tried to muster one last pathetic defense, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Officers, please, there is a massive misunderstanding here. I am a highly respected businessman. I have powerful lawyers. We can clear this up with a simple phone call. You can make your phone calls from the holding cell at the federal precinct, the detective replied coldly. Secure him. An officer stepped forward, grabbing Gregory's arm and spinning him around. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly through the luxurious private dining room. It was the absolute, undeniable sound of a toxic empire officially collapsing. Gregory slumped his shoulders, offering no physical resistance as the cold steel locked tightly around his wrists. Brenda, however, refused to surrender her delusions quietly. She scrambled up from the carpet, her designer silk dress wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. She backed away from the approaching officers. "No, wait!" she shrieked, her voice pitching high with manic desperation. "You cannot arrest me! I am a mother! I was just trying to protect my family. My daughter orchestrated this entire thing out of spite. She is framing us! Arrest her!" "Put your hands behind your back," the second officer commanded. "If you resist, we will add charges for assaulting a police officer." Brenda turned her wild, terrified eyes to me. She was begging silently, expecting the daughter she had ruthlessly abused for 15 years to somehow intervene and save her from federal prosecution. I simply stared back at her with absolute, unwavering indifference. I did not offer a single ounce of familial mercy. I watched as the officer forcefully grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back and securing the handcuffs. The golden child and the narcissistic mother were finally neutralized. "Let us go," the lead detective instructed, gesturing toward the exit. They marched Gregory and Brenda out of the private room and directly into the main dining area of La Cour. I followed closely behind them, standing near the glass threshold with my corporate attorney, Harrison, who had silently monitored the execution of my audit. We watched the ultimate walk of shame unfold in real time. The main dining room was packed with Chicago's elite. Billionaires, politicians, and high society socialites sat at the tables. These were the exact people Brenda had spent her entire life trying to impress. She had lied, stolen, and destroyed her own children's futures just to pretend she belonged in this exact room. Now she was being paraded right through the center of it in steel handcuffs. The ambient chatter completely died down. A profound, uncomfortable silence fell over the wealthy patrons. Every single eye locked onto my parents. I watched the elite diners whispering to each other, their faces contorted with judgment and disgust. Several people discreetly pulled out their smartphones, capturing the humiliating spectacle on video. Brenda tried to bow her head and hide her face behind her disheveled hair, weeping uncontrollably as the cameras recorded her absolute ruin. Gregory stared firmly at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the very society he had leveraged his life to impress. They had constantly threatened to ruin my corporate reputation. They had promised to publicly humiliate me and destroy everything I had built. Instead, I had handed them a mirror, and the universe had delivered their exact threat right back to them. "A flawless execution," Matty Harrison murmured quietly beside me, adjusting his glasses as he watched the police escort my parents out the front doors and into the flashing lights of the waiting patrol cars. "You dismantled them completely." "They dismantled themselves, Harrison." I corrected him, keeping my eyes on the spinning red and blue lights. "I just finalized the paperwork." I turned away from the spectacle and walked back into the private dining room. The silence inside was thick and heavy. The remnants of the lavish dinner sat untouched on the mahogany table. Brittany and Tyler remained exactly where the police had left them. They were staring at the empty chairs where their parents had been sitting just moments before. The illusion of their perfect upper-class lives was permanently shattered, leaving behind nothing but debt and devastation. Brittany was still sitting on the floor, clutching her knees to her chest. She looked up at me, her face streaked with ruined makeup. Her diamond engagement ring sat abandoned on the table, a glaring reminder of the good man she had lost to protect a criminal. She had traded her integrity for a fake designer lifestyle, and now she had absolutely nothing left at all. Tyler sat frozen in his chair. He was staring blankly at the blue manila folder containing his ruined credit report. He looked like a hollow shell of the arrogant golden child he used to be. The reality that his own mother had actively destroyed his financial future before he even graduated high school was slowly paralyzing him. He was 19 years old, drowning in $45,000 of debt, and completely alone. I picked up my leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. The sound made them both flinch. "You wanted me to bring a check tonight," I said, looking down at my younger half-siblings. "I brought you the absolute truth instead. What you decide to do with it now is entirely up to you." I turned my back on them and walked out of the room, leaving them to sit in the ruins. I stepped out into the crisp, cool Chicago night and breathed in the fresh air. The loud sirens had faded into the distance. 48 hours later, I sat at the sleek granite island of my penthouse kitchen, watching the morning light reflect off the Chicago skyline. The heavy chains of their manipulation were finally broken, and I was the only one holding the heavy hammer. My phone vibrated against the stone countertop, breaking the quiet solitude. It was a secure message from the property management firm I had contracted to oversee the newly acquired suburban estate. I opened the notification. A high-resolution photograph loaded onto my screen. I stared at the image, feeling a profound, absolute sense of universal symmetry settling deep into my bones. The photograph showed the sweeping, perfectly manicured driveway of the mansion I now owned. Sitting directly on the curb, waiting for the municipal sanitation trucks, was a massive pile of heavy-duty black trash bags. My property manager had followed my strict eviction protocols to the exact letter. When the 24-hour deadline expired yesterday morning, Brenda and Gregory were securely locked in federal holding cells, unable to return to the premises. Brittany and Tyler had scrambled to salvage whatever personal items they could carry, but everything else, Brenda's counterfeit designer wardrobe, Gregory's cheap golf clubs, their entire catalog of suburban vanity had been unceremoniously shoved into industrial garbage bags and hauled out to the street. I zoomed in on the photograph. It was an exact poetic parallel to the defining trauma of my youth. 15 years ago, on a freezing Christmas Eve, I had stood on a very similar driveway, shivering in a thin jacket, while Brenda tossed my childhood belongings out the front door in identical black plastic bags. She had told me I was garbage. She had treated my entire existence like a disposable inconvenience. Now, a decade and a half later, the universe had flawlessly balanced the ledger. Their entire fraudulent life was literally sitting in the trash, and I was the woman holding the deed to the castle they had stolen to build. I locked the screen of my phone and took a slow sip of my black coffee, allowing the beautiful, undeniable reality of their eviction to fully wash over me. But Brenda was not a woman who accepted defeat with any shred of dignity. Even sitting in a concrete cell at the Cook County Jail, wearing a highly unflattering orange jumpsuit, she was desperately trying to claw her way back to the center of the narrative. By noon, my lead public relations director, a brilliant strategist named Chloe, buzzed my private office line. We had a developing situation. Brenda was aggressively using her allotted daily phone calls from the holding facility. She was not calling defense attorneys or bail bondsmen. She was systematically dialing the tip lines of every major local news outlet and tabloid publication in the greater Chicago area. Chloe patched the intercepted audio recordings through to my office speakers. The jailhouse phone system automatically recorded every outgoing call, and my legal team had swiftly acquired the transcripts through a standard Freedom of Information request. Brenda's voice echoed through my office, dripping with manufactured hysterical tears. She was pitching a wildly fabricated sob story to a skeptical junior reporter at a local broadcasting station. She wailed about how her wealthy, sociopathic daughter had maliciously orchestrated a corporate takeover of their family home. She claimed I was a vengeful, greedy billionaire who had bribed federal authorities to falsely imprison my loving parents just to avoid paying for my sister's wedding. She painted herself as the ultimate tragic victim, a devoted mother, sacrificed on the altar of her cruel daughter's corporate ambition. She is trying to incite a public relations crisis, Chloe stated professionally over the intercom. She wants to create a media circus to pressure the district attorney into dropping the charges or offering a lenient plea deal out of public sympathy. Some of the lower-tier blogs are already drafting clickbait headlines based on her frantic phone calls. They love a wealthy family destruction story. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my mahogany desk. Brenda fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield she had just stepped onto. She was trying to fight a professional crisis management chief executive officer in the court of public opinion. It was the equivalent of bringing a butter knife to a drone strike. "Shut her down entirely," I instructed Chloe, my voice entirely void of emotion. "Draft the standard corporate litigation press release, strip away every single ounce of emotion, family drama, and personal history. I want pure, unadulterated financial facts." Within 45 minutes, my elite public relations team deployed a highly sanitized, legally airtight press release to every single legitimate news desk, financial publication, and media outlet in the state. We did not mention my childhood. We did not mention the trash bags in the snow or the canceled wedding. The press release was a masterpiece of lethal corporate transparency. It explicitly detailed the staggering dollar amounts of the federal indictments. It clearly outlined Gregory's offshore tax evasion and cryptocurrency margin defaults. It meticulously documented Brenda's systemic wire fraud, including the exact dates she stole her future son-in-law's Social Security number to secure fraudulent bank loans. We even attached the redacted official federal arrest warrants for public viewing. The response was instantaneous and absolutely devastating to Brenda's fabricated narrative. The moment the legitimate news anchors and seasoned financial journalists saw the hard, cold, undeniable proof of massive federal felonies, they dropped Brenda's pathetic sob story like a toxic asset. No reputable media outlet was willing to touch a weeping mother routine when faced with certified federal documents proving she was a serial identity thief. The lower-tier gossip blogs immediately deleted their drafted articles, terrified of being sued for defamation by my powerful corporate legal team. The narrative was forever sealed. Brenda's voice was permanently silenced today. I stood by the window and watched the sun set over the city. I had finally won the absolute, ultimate war. 2 weeks passed since the spectacular implosion of Brenda and Gregory's fraudulent empire. The dust had settled across the Chicago social scene, leaving my firm stronger and my personal life completely devoid of toxic interference. I was reviewing a quarterly profit projection on a quiet Thursday afternoon when the intercom on my mahogany desk buzzed. My executive assistant, a woman who rarely interrupted my deep work blocks, sounded hesitant. She informed me that I had an unannounced visitor waiting in the reception area who lacked an appointment but insisted on speaking with me immediately. It was my younger brother, Tyler. I instructed her to send him back. The heavy glass door to my office clicked open a minute later. I looked up from my glowing monitors and observed the 19-year-old boy stepping hesitantly onto the thick carpet. The transformation was startling. The arrogant, entitled, golden child who had sat at liqueur, dripping in stolen designer silk, was entirely gone. He was wearing a faded generic hooded sweatshirt and a pair of worn denim jeans. His shoulders were severely slumped, his posture radiating absolute defeat. The manufactured glow of his suburban privilege had been completely stripped away. It left behind a terrified, hollow shell of a young man who had just collided with the unforgiving concrete of the real world. He stood near the door, awkwardly twisting the strings of his sweatshirt. He did not possess the aggressive posturing of Gregory or the loud, manipulative theatrics of our mother. He just looked profoundly lost. "Sit down, Tyler," I commanded, gesturing to one of the leather guest chairs positioned opposite my desk. He moved slowly across the room and sank into the chair. He stared down at his scuffed sneakers for a very long and painful moment. He was visibly struggling to find his voice. The silence in my office was heavy, but I did not offer any comforting words to fill the void. I waited with clinical patience for him to state his business. "I do not know what to do, Maddie," Tyler finally admitted, his voice cracking slightly. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on his hands. "Mom and Gregory are navigating their criminal indictments from a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. Their public defender says they are facing severe federal prison time for the massive bank and wire fraud. Brittany is sleeping on a friend's couch and waiting tables at a diner downtown because she absolutely refuses to speak to our parents. And I have absolutely nothing." I remained perfectly still, listening to the predictable fallout of Brenda's greed. "I tried to enroll in the local community college yesterday," Tyler continued, his breathing becoming shallow and panicked. "I figured I could start over, get a basic business degree, and figure out my life. But I cannot get a single student loan. The financial aid office ran my profile and denied me immediately. My credit is completely ruined forever now. I have no money. I cannot get a job because I cannot pass the standard corporate background checks, and I am drowning in a massive financial hole I did not even dig." He finally looked up, his eyes pooling with desperate tears. He leaned forward, grasping the edge of my desk. "I came here to ask you for help, Maddie," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I know you hate Mom and Gregory. I know what they did to you was unforgivable. But I was just a kid when she stole my social security number card. I did not know she was opening those credit cards. I came to ask if you could give me $45,000, just enough to pay off the fraudulent debt she put in my name. I just want a clean slate. I swear I will sign a legally binding contract. I will pay you back every single cent once I get my degree and secure a job. Please, Maddie, you are a multimillionaire. $45,000 is absolutely nothing to you, but it would literally save my entire life." I looked quietly at my highly distressed younger brother. I remembered the little 4-year-old boy whose dedicated Lego room was deemed more valuable than my physical presence in our childhood home. I remembered the intense bitterness I felt walking through the freezing snow while he slept warmly in his custom bed. But looking at him now, I also recognized that he was just another tragic victim in Brenda's incredibly long game of manipulation. He was a disposable pawn she had sacrificed without a second thought. However, recognizing his extreme victimhood did not mean I was going to participate in his rescue. "I will not pay for this. I am not going to give you $45,000 to pay off a debt that you did not personally accrue," I said gently but firmly. Tyler's face instantly fell. The desperate, fragile hope shattered completely in his eyes. A single tear escaped and tracked down his pale cheek. He nodded slowly, pushing himself back into the leather chair, as if he had just been physically struck. "I understand," Tyler whispered, his voice completely defeated. "I should not have asked you. I know I do not deserve your money. This has absolutely nothing to do with what you deserve." I corrected him sharply, leaning forward. "This has everything to do with breaking a generational curse.
Writing a check to magically make your problems disappear is exactly what Brenda trained you to expect. She conditioned you and Brittany to view family as an endless financial transaction. She taught you that whenever things get difficult, someone else will simply absorb the cost and bail you out. That toxic cycle of enabling stops permanently with me. You are waiting for a savior, Tyler, but I refuse to be your automated teller machine. I will not finance your escape route today or ever. Tyler stared at me, the finality of my words, crushing the last fragile remnants of his suburban entitlement. He had walked into my corporate office, expecting the classic family bailout, assuming my vast wealth would automatically translate into a magical eraser for his problems. When I explicitly denied him the cash, I watched his chest heave with quiet, panicked breaths. He looked around my expansive executive suite as if searching for a hidden exit. There was no exit. There was only the harsh, unforgiving reality of adulthood staring him right in the face. "If you do not help me, I am going to drown," Tyler whispered, his voice shaking with genuine terror. "I have absolutely nothing left." "You are only drowning because you are still holding on to the anchor Brenda tied around your neck," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level and completely devoid of pity. "I told you I would not write you a check, Tyler. I never said I would not give you a way out." I opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a thick, textured business card. I slid it across the smooth glass surface until it stopped directly in front of his folded hands. Tyler looked down at it hesitantly. "That is the direct contact information for a highly aggressive attorney who specializes exclusively in familial identity theft and financial fraud," I explained. "I have already paid his retaining fee in full for the next 6 months. He is expecting your call this afternoon." Tyler picked up the card, turning it over in his trembling fingers. "What is he going to do?" "He is going to walk you into a federal police precinct," I stated clinically, "and he is going to sit beside you while you file a formal, documented police report for severe identity theft against your own mother. You are going to hand the detectives your comprehensive credit report and swear on the record that Brenda stole your social security number to open those 6 fraudulent credit cards." Tyler dropped the business card on the desk, as if it had physically burned his skin. "I cannot do that," he gasped, shaking his head frantically. "I cannot file a police report against my own mom. The authorities are already investigating Gregory for offshore tax evasion and Brenda for stealing from Malik. If I file this report, they will add massive federal charges. She will go to federal prison for years." She made that deliberate choice the exact moment she decided your entire future was worth sacrificing for a counterfeit designer handbag. I fired back, leaning forward to ensure he felt the absolute weight of my words. She did not hesitate to completely ruin your life to fund her country club lunches. Why are you hesitating to save your own life to protect her?" He looked away, fresh tears spilling over his eyelashes. "Because she is my mother." "And you were her son," I countered ruthlessly. "That did not stop her from saddling you with $45,000 of defaulted debt and a credit score of 410. Listen to me very carefully, Tyler. The only legal mechanism to remove fraudulent debt from your Social Security number is to file a police report naming the perpetrator. The credit bureaus will not erase a single dime unless you prove it was stolen. If you do not report her, you are legally accepting that debt as your own. You will spend the next 20 years paying off her luxury spa treatments while living in absolute poverty. You have to choose yourself today. If you refuse, you will spend the rest of your life drowning in her toxic consequences." Tyler stared at the business card. The agonizing internal battle raged across his young face. The lifetime of intense emotional conditioning fought violently against the cold, undeniable logic of the lifeline I was offering him. While he silently waged war against his own brainwashing, I reached into my desk drawer one final time.
I pulled out a standard multi-page legal document bound with a heavy binder clip. I placed it on the desk right next to the attorney's business card. Tyler wiped his eyes with the back of his sweatshirt sleeve and looked at the new stack of papers. "What is that?" "It is a binding employment contract," I answered. "My firm currently has an opening for a mailroom clerk. The starting pay is strict minimum wage. The daily hours are incredibly grueling, often requiring early mornings and late nights, managing heavy physical document deliveries across the financial district. You will be at the absolute bottom of the corporate ladder. You will receive zero special treatment, and nobody in this building will care that you are my half-brother. If you are late, you will be fired." Tyler blinked, thoroughly overwhelmed by the brutal terms I was laying out. "I do not understand. How does working in a mailroom fix my life?" "Because this firm offers a highly specific corporate benefit," I explained. "We have a strict tuition reimbursement program for entry-level employees who wish to advance their education. If you maintain full-time hours in the mailroom and perform your duties flawlessly, the company will cover the total cost of your night classes at the local community college." I grabbed a silver pen and set it down on top of the employment contract. "I will not hand you a pile of unearned cash, Tyler. But I will hand you a shovel. You are going to work for your tuition. You are going to rebuild your credit profile properly. You are going to earn your own way out of the pit Brenda dug for you. This is your only path to actual independence. You can take the job, call the lawyer, and start building a real life today. Or you can walk out those glass doors and return to the cheap motel with the people who destroyed you. The choice is entirely yours." The quiet hum of the skyscraper surrounded us as Tyler stared at the two items on the desk. The business card representing the painful destruction of his childhood illusions, and the employment contract representing a grueling but honest future. He looked at me, realizing for the first time in his sheltered life that nobody was going to hand him a golden ticket ever again. A heavy, jagged sob ripped from his chest. He buried his face in his hands, crying openly and loudly in my executive office. He cried for the mother who had betrayed him, the fake wealth that had vanished, and the terrifying reality of the hard work ahead. I let him cry. I did not offer him a tissue or a comforting hug. He needed to feel the absolute death of his entitlement. After several long minutes, Tyler took a deep, shuddering breath. He reached forward with a shaking hand and picked up the silver pen. He pulled the employment contract toward him, flipped to the final signature page, and signed his name on the dotted line. He set the pen down, picked up the attorney's business card, and tucked it safely into the pocket of his faded sweatshirt. He took his first genuine step toward actual independence. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly slow, but they grind exceedingly fine. It took 8 grueling months of endless depositions, aggressive discovery motions, and shattered plea deal negotiations before the actual trials officially commenced. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case wisely decided to try Brenda and Gregory separately. Their crimes, while heavily intertwined by their mutual insatiable greed, violated entirely different sections of the federal penal code. Brenda was scheduled to face the identity theft and wire fraud charges first, in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in the downtown federal building. I sat in the very back row of the gallery on the opening day of her trial. I wore a tailored navy suit, observing the proceedings with the same detached, clinical focus I applied to my corporate forensic audits. Brenda sat at the defense table, wearing a highly subdued gray blouse that her overworked public defender had likely purchased for her. She looked significantly older, stripped of her expensive cosmetics and counterfeit designer accessories. But the aggressive, arrogant set of her jaw remained completely unchanged. The prosecution built their case methodically, laying out the absolute, undeniable paper trail of stolen Social Security numbers. They presented Tyler's ruined credit report first, establishing her established history of familial financial abuse. But the true fatal blow arrived on the third day of the trial, when the prosecution called Malik to the witness stand. Malik walked into the courtroom radiating absolute, unshakable dignity. He swore his oath and sat down, his dark eyes fixed firmly on the federal prosecutor. He did not look at Brenda once. Over the next 2 hours, Malik laid out the exact sequence of events from the morning of the cyber attack. He detailed how Brenda had exploited his trust and used his administrative credentials to infiltrate his secure architectural firm network and fraudulently secured a $60,000 personal loan using his highly protected financial identity. He presented the digital access logs, the bank transfer receipts, and the canceled wedding contracts, painting a vivid, inescapable picture of a sociopathic predator exploiting her own future son-in-law. Brenda's public defender stood up for cross-examination, attempting to poke holes in Malik's timeline or suggest a verbal misunderstanding regarding financial assistance for the wedding. But Brenda's malignant narcissism simply could not endure the public humiliation of being painted as a common thief. She had spent her entire life believing she was the ultimate victim and the supreme matriarch who deserved absolute obedience. As Malik calmly rebuffed the defense attorney's weak assertions, Brenda suddenly slammed her hands flat onto the defense table. She stood up, completely ignoring the frantic, whispered warnings of her own legal counsel. "That is a complete lie!" Brenda shouted, her voice echoing shrilly across the cavernous courtroom. She pointed an accusing finger directly at Malik on the witness stand. "I did not steal anything from you. You were going to marry my daughter. I raised her, and I fed her and clothed her for 22 years. I provided you with a beautiful, educated bride, and I was completely entitled to use your credit to secure the wedding venue our family deserved. You owed me that money for giving you my daughter." A collective stunned gasp rippled through the gallery. The federal judge violently banged his gavel, demanding immediate order, but the damage was irreversibly done. Brenda had just publicly confessed to the crime in open court, aggressively justifying her federal felony as a twisted form of maternal compensation. Her own attorney buried his face in his hands. The prosecutor simply smiled and rested his case. Her absolute entitlement had dug her grave, and her lack of impulse control had happily pushed her directly into it. While Brenda rapidly imploded in courtroom 4, Gregory was fighting his own losing battle in courtroom 7. His tax evasion trial was a completely different breed of disaster. The Internal Revenue Service auditors had brought a mountain of forensic evidence detailing his highly illegal offshore cryptocurrency accounts and his deliberate, multi-year effort to defraud the federal government. He was facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Gregory was a coward who hid behind his booming voice and aggressive physical posturing. When faced with the terrifying reality of spending his twilight years locked inside a maximum security penitentiary, the fragile loyalty he shared with Brenda completely disintegrated. He desperately attempted to throw his own wife entirely under the bus. Gregory fired his original defense team and instructed his new attorneys to approach the federal prosecutors with a revised, desperate narrative. He claimed he was a clueless, overworked husband who had absolutely no knowledge of the family finances. He officially testified that Brenda had completely manipulated the crypto trading accounts, forged his signature on the tax returns, and orchestrated the entire offshore evasion scheme without his consent. He tried to paint her as the sole criminal mastermind, offering to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutors easily saw right through his pathetic, fabricated defense, utilizing the forensic documents I had provided to completely destroy his timeline. But the sheer betrayal ignited a spectacular legal warfare between the two of them. When Brenda caught wind of Gregory's testimony from her holding cell, she retaliated with absolute venom. The toxic loyalty they once used as a weapon to crush me and silence their children shattered completely into a million jagged pieces.
They began aggressively filing civil lawsuits against one another, directly from their respective holding cells. Brenda sued Gregory for emotional distress and financial coercion. Gregory countersued Brenda for defamation and marital fraud. They weaponized their remaining public defenders against each other, leaking highly embarrassing personal secrets to the guards and the court reporters, desperately trying to drag the other down faster the chort. They spent their days sitting in sterile concrete boxes, utterly consumed by hatred for the person they had once sworn to love completely, forever. I did not waste another second of my valuable time thinking about their miserable existence behind bars. The federal judge ultimately handed down a brutal 12-year sentence for Brenda and a 15-year sentence for Gregory. They were permanently removed from the chessboard, rendered completely powerless. With the primary architects of my childhood misery safely locked away in federal penitentiaries, I turned my attention back to the final piece of their shattered empire. The sprawling suburban mansion in Fairfield was still legally registered to my corporate holding company. It was a massive, ostentatious monument to their endless greed, filled with empty rooms, fake luxury, and terrible memories. I had absolutely no desire to keep it or maintain it. I contacted a high-end real estate broker the following Monday morning and officially put the estate on the open market. The suburban housing market was incredibly aggressive, and the property was located in a highly desirable school district. It instantly triggered a massive bidding war between wealthy families looking for a turnkey estate. I sold the house in less than 2 weeks, walking away with a staggering multi-million-dollar profit after the defaulted mortgage and legal fees were completely cleared from the ledger. But I did not absorb that massive influx of cash into my personal wealth portfolio. I did not buy a luxury yacht or a tropical vacation home. That money was fundamentally built on a dark foundation of lies, systemic theft, and familial exploitation. It needed to be thoroughly cleansed and completely repurposed for good. I took the entire multi-million-dollar profit from the real estate sale and established a comprehensive financial literacy foundation. I named it the Winter Dawn Initiative, a highly intentional and subtle nod to the freezing Christmas Eve when my true independence actually began. The foundation was specifically designed to provide free legal representation, financial education, and emergency housing grants for young adults transitioning out of financially abusive homes. We aggressively hired top-tier credit repair specialists to help teenagers whose narcissistic parents had stolen their social security numbers. We taught these vulnerable kids how to immediately freeze their credit reports, how to open secure and hidden bank accounts, and how to legally sever financial ties with toxic family members. I took the exact financial weapon Brenda had used to destroy Tyler's future and forged it into a massive protective shield to save thousands of other vulnerable kids from suffering the exact same horrific fate. 6 months after the foundation officially launched its programs, I stood alone on the expansive glass balcony of my Chicago penthouse. The evening air was crisp and cool against my skin. The sprawling city grid glittered brilliantly beneath me, a vast, illuminated network of endless possibilities and relentless ambition. I leaned against the heavy glass railing, looking out over the majestic skyline, and allowed myself a rare moment of profound, quiet reflection. 15 years ago, I was an 18-year-old girl, shivering violently in the driving snow, surrounded by cheap black trash bags containing my entire life. I had no money, no family, and absolutely no idea how I was going to survive the brutal winter night. My mother had looked me directly in the eyes and told me I was an entirely worthless burden. Today, at 33 years old, I stood at the absolute pinnacle of the corporate financial world. I was the respected chief executive officer of a highly lucrative firm, a multimillionaire homeowner, and a fierce protector of the vulnerable. I had built an impenetrable, glorious fortress out of the very bricks they threw at me. The generational curse was officially broken,
and the healing process had finally begun to take root in the siblings I had left behind. Tyler was actually thriving in his new, highly disciplined reality. He had embraced the grueling demands of the corporate mailroom with surprising grit. He showed up early every single morning, sorted the heavy legal documents without a single complaint, and earned the genuine respect of the senior partners. He was aggressively utilizing the firm's tuition reimbursement program to attend night classes at the community college, pulling straight A's in his introductory business courses. The identity theft lawyer I hired was successfully negotiating the complete removal of the fraudulent debt from his credit profile, slowly rebuilding his stolen identity. He was finally learning what it truly meant to earn his own way in the world, and he was immensely proud of every single hard-earned paycheck. Even Brittany had been forced to rapidly evolve. With the country club facade completely obliterated and Malik long gone, she had to face the brutal reality of the working class. She had secured a full-time waitress job at a highly demanding downtown diner. It was a humbling, physically exhausting existence, but she was finally learning the actual value of a hard-earned dollar. She was paying her own rent for a tiny studio apartment, relying entirely on her own manual labor, instead of manipulating others for unearned luxury. She had a very long way to go, but she was surviving on her own merits for the very first time in her pampered, sheltered life. I took a deep breath of the cool Chicago air, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace completely wash over me. The war was officially over. I turned away from the glittering skyline and walked back into the warmth of my penthouse. I looked directly into the camera lens, ready to deliver my final message. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood is the poison drowning you. Cutting off toxic blood relatives is not a sin, it is survival. Have you ever had to bankrupt a toxic family member's lies to save your own life? Share your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, and never let anyone tell you that you owe them your future. The harrowing story of Maddie and her financially abusive family highlights a profound lesson about the nature of true help, personal boundaries, and authentic independence. When faced with a loved one in a severe crisis, the natural human instinct, especially within complex family dynamics, is often to provide an immediate, painless fix, such as writing a check to wipe the slate clean. However, this narrative masterfully illustrates that providing unearned bailouts frequently just perpetuates a toxic cycle of enabling. When Maddie's younger brother Tyler desperately begs for $45,000 to clear the fraudulent debt maliciously created by their mother, Maddie ruthlessly but necessarily refuses. She wisely recognizes that simply handing him the cash would only reinforce the exact manipulative conditioning their parents instilled in them, the belief that family is merely an endless financial transaction. True compassion is not always soft or accommodating. Sometimes it requires the brutal honesty of forcing someone to face reality. By explicitly denying him an easy escape route, Maddie successfully breaks a destructive generational curse. Instead of cash, Maddie offers Tyler a grueling mailroom job with a tuition reimbursement program alongside legal support to hold his abuser legally accountable. This deliberate shift from enabling to empowering forces him to build his own resilience, self-worth, and genuine independence. The underlying lesson here is incredibly universal. You cannot truly save people by continuously absorbing the fallout of their toxic behavior. Real empowerment means handing someone the practical tools to dig themselves out of a hole, rather than just pulling them up only for them to inevitably fall back in. Establishing firm boundaries is the ultimate act of self-preservation and the only way to foster genuine growth. Evaluate the boundaries in your own relationships today and take the necessary steps to stop enabling toxic cycles.